Good morning, everybody. What a gift to be here. I love the energy in this room. I want to say thank you to Jackie Ama, the entire team, to the leaders who are here from LACO, to my co-presenters, and especially all of us who are here learning and teaching together. This is an extraordinary time for early childhood in our state. We have the largest, you probably know this, it is the largest initiative in the entire nation for a universal pre-kindergarten, high-quality year for 4-year-olds before the kindergarten year. I mean, everybody across the country is inspired and watching this. And we have been waiting for this time, those of us in early childhood, for a long time, wanting to bridge early childhood with formally with the public school system. And here we are. So thank you from my heart, from all of our hearts, for being here, for leaning in and learning about what is right for our children. What I want to do in the next hour and a bit, for those of you who are administrators, I hope you leave here with an inspiration of what it looks like to see high quality, engaged, active, joyful, equitable early childhood, some windows into that. And then you'll have lots of other opportunities to build from what we talk about here in your breakout sessions and today and tomorrow. For those of you who are here as early childhood professionals in whatever role, a coach, a teacher, Head Start, we have lots of different kinds of early educators here. I hope this honors your brilliance. I hope this honors your practice. I hope you see yourself here and say, yes, this is what I've practiced for so long. This is what I care about. I hope you see all of the hard work that you're doing in these stories. So this morning, we are going to talk about, certainly we're celebrating this moment for how extraordinary it is. I'm going to talk a little bit about young children as learners, a 4-year-old. What does that mean, 4 and 5-year-old? We're going to look a lot at play-powered learning and different examples of that. At the very end, I'm going to talk about play essential to equity all throughout. But we're also going to look at and think about some myths around play, because we have to name that. We have to name the myths in the room, because you are the leaders who are going to set the tone to make sure that you have developmentally informed, culturally, linguistically responsive play in your buildings, in your districts, in your centers. So it's really, really important that you understand the myths and that you can be the first ally to disrupt those. This is the cover of the CDE's Play-Based Learning book. This is one of the ones that's in your bag, I believe. Look at this, just take in this beautiful picture. You can see the joy on their faces, their engagement. You can see they're leaning in, they're talking, interacting. We always want to start with something, what we call in early childhood, the image of the child. This is so central to high quality early childhood. What is the image of the child? And in a minute, I'm going to give you just a few seconds to talk at your table about this, but I want you to think about this. It is what we take for granted, those assumptions that we have about what a young child, and I want you to think about at this point a TK child. What we think they're capable of, what we think they need adult assistance to do versus what autonomy we think they can do themselves, what we think our role is in their learning, what we think is our goal for their education. We have these assumptions in our head about the image of the child. And we set up our environments based on that image. We interact with children based on that image. And here's the thing. Alison Gopnik, have any of you heard of her from University of California, Berkeley? She does a lot of research on young children, has written beautiful books on babies and so on. And she talks about, it's only a couple decades ago, 30 years ago or so, that we thought young children were just like defective adults, right? That we had these images of them. Well, they're so egocentric, they can only imagine what they need. They can't think of other people's needs. They can't distinguish between fantasy and reality. They don't have a sense of morality and justice and fairness. They don't think about those things. They don't notice race. They don't notice gender. Everything was what they couldn't do. It was like they were defective adults on a path to becoming human, right? Does this ring true? And we know from research and from our lived experience as parents, as professionals, there's nothing farther from the truth, right? And I want to invite you to be inspired by somebody who, in the world of early childhood, we really esteem. Loris Malaguzzi, who is the father of the Reggio Emilia philosophy and approach. And what he talks about and invites us into think about is children as strong and capable, children as having rights and not just needs. And we'll talk about why that's important. But just for a minute, turn to your table and think about, when you think about the image of the child, what words come to your mind? The young TK child. What words come to your mind? How about we'll start with this table. One word that came up at your table here. Joyful, inquisitive. Great. How about over here? Curiosity. Beautiful. Right here in front. Trusting. Okay. Over here. Sponges. So soaking in so much. And the table right next to you. Open to others, open to share, open experiences. Beautiful. Okay. Thank you so much. What I want to say, Alison Gopnik's work and so many people's work calls us into is to challenge that idea of the child as vulnerable, as having needs, as what they can't do, and instead to think of them as strong and capable, as open, curious, trusting, all of those things you said. I want us to think of the metaphor of a scientist who is exploring, interested, needs to discover, needs to touch, needs to engage with things, has theories, tests out those theories, right? Challenges themselves, includes new information, and keeps moving forward. You're going to see how important this image of the child is in everything that we talk about. Now, I wanted to bring forward this statement. I know we would all agree, but we have to think about our why. Why is it that we're here? Why are you taking, for some of you, 2 days in your final week? I know that this is a huge commitment. We have to say our why and why we are here, and remembering what is right for children, what is going to support children to have that thrivance from the beginning of their early years is so essential. And let's start with this idea. Every single young child that we teach with has the right, not just the need, but the right to feel seen, to feel heard as their authentic self by their teacher and those that care for them, okay? And the way we're going to see how this is, children are seen and heard in a context of playful learning. So there's a couple of ideas I'm going to weave through, not just today, but in all of the different sessions that I am leading. And these are, think of these as like framing ideas before we dive in and look at specific practice. So the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child says that they literally wrote into the convention that it is the right of every child to be able to play. This impacts children around the world. And why did they do this? Because it is the way that children's brains are wired. So when we think about that right versus need, I want you to think, if we remove play from children, we don't allow them to be their best selves. We do, and we had you say this morning, which I really appreciated. It is taking away a right of our children. We also, this is one of those myths you might have heard, or you might be thinking yourself about play versus learning, and that might be a struggle for you, because we've had that bifurcation for a long time. What you're going to see is that play is central to learning for young children, and it's not an either or, and that teachers and adults support learning goals through play all the time. Children support their own learning goals through play. You're very used to this idea of rigor. It even came up in our introduction today, and I think you're going to see that we absolutely have rigor in play-based programs. It just looks different with children. So we're going to build those muscles for what does rigor look like. And again, I loved your opening comments, because we can't have rigor without joy. Joy is so central to equity and to engagement and to children feeling like they are seen and heard and they feel safe. And I think, again, I'm going to make a case for how a play-powered approach is not just good for children, it's central to equity. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but I do want to just pick up on what was said earlier. Those of you who say, wow, I've been doing TK for a long time, it's true. It's been out. We've had it out for about 10 years, right? Just almost 10 years. But when it was started as the first year of 2 years of kindergarten. And because it It wasn't attached to our early childhood foundations, our standards. It was really, people took kindergarten and adjusted it a bit. It wasn't thought of, I see lots of heads nodding. It wasn't thought of as a continuum where we think about early childhood best practice and lead that through a pre-K to 3 continuum. So we have this opportunity right now to completely reimagine, reframe, and I would say reclaim the right for young children in TK to have environments that support them to learn in the way that their brains and bodies are wired to learn. Some of you, in what we talk about, let me just say one last thing about this, some of you might see your experience in your TK and say, this is what we're doing, and this will validate you. Some of you will say, well, a lot of that looks familiar, and there's some learning edges there. And some of you might say, wow, this is really, really dramatically different than what I'm doing. And all of those places on the continuum are okay and fine, and we welcome them. The key is that you're here and on this learning journey. Bell hooks, because what we're going to be talking about, and especially for those of you that TK is new, or it's quite academic and bringing in a play-based approach is going to be dramatically new for you. What we're going to be talking about for the next 2 days is a big lift. It's not easy. We're going to take a step forward, probably 2 back, another step forward. Sometimes it might feel exhausting. I know some of you might feel like, wow, there's a lot of stress, a lot of pressure on me, and now I have to grow into this whole new experience in TK, right? What I want to call on, first of all, this is why we need to be thinking constantly about that why for our young children. Why are we here? To support every single child to feel seen and heard and validated. But I want to call on bell hooks. Some of you might know of her work. I am very inspired by bell hooks. And she talks about how when we have to do really hard work in education, really hard work that sometimes has to disrupt things that are not right, not equitable, it takes courage, it takes persistence, it takes time. And she talks about the courage to say we need love. We need love and a love-based approach, and not just love that is a feeling. We need to have lots of feelings about loving our children. But she talks about love as an action towards accountability. And I want to invite all of us to take that inspiration from bell hooks and say, what our job is today over the next 2 days and then forward, even when it gets hard, is to say, we are here to bring a love-based pedagogy to these young children. So let's get started in looking at what does that mean? What does that look like? Rapid brain development, you've probably all heard about this, right? That the brain develops faster in the first 5-6 years than any other time in our lifespan. In fact, by the time that a child is 6, the weight of the brain is going to quadruple, almost quadruple, and about 90% of its volume is already there by the time it's 6. So we are literally, this is why I talk about early childhood educators are brain builders. They're architects of the brain, because literally your brain is what Bruce Perry, an expert on this, talks about. It is use dependent. So depending on the kinds of experiences a child has in their environment, you're setting down the foundations of that child's neuroarchitecture. We want to get it right from the beginning, and we'll talk about what that takes. A few things that when we think about how to get it right and what we want to see in our environments, we need to talk about state-dependent functioning. Have any of you heard of state-dependent functioning? Bruce Perry's work? A few of you? Every educator, every teacher, every administrator needs to learn about state-dependent functioning. It will change your world. Let's think about this arousal staircase. Basically, state-dependent functioning says all day, every day, this is for every child, every human on earth, all of you today, right now, sitting at your tables. Your brains are doing 2 things, and your bodies are doing 2 things. Internally, your brain all throughout the day is scanning and asking one question. Am I safe, or is there a threat? So it's saying internally, am I hungry? Am I tired? Am I cold? Do I feel safe in this environment? And if any of those sources of threat, depending on how threatening they are, they'll send you up, they activate your stress response system, and they send you up that arousal ladder. It's also doing that same scanning externally, right? Am I safe? Is there a threat? So again, are there noises? Some of you who had a Corolla earlier on might have felt like you were sent up the arousal staircase. That was your car. But you're looking, are things familiar to me? Is there something threatening to me? And the more you go up the staircase, from calm and alert to alarm, fear, and terror, the more that you go up that arousal staircase, everything is going to come through the brainstem, that red part, where it's asking that question, right? Am I safe? Is there a threat? The more threat there is, the less access, and again, this is for you and for children, the less access you have to your limbic system, which is you can see the blue section, the part of your brain that is responsible for building relationships, for naming feelings, developing strong attachments. Really important, right, for all of us and young children for their brain development. You have less access to that the more you're up on the arousal continuum. And the cortex. You have very little access to that if you're high on the arousal continuum. But I want you to think about that cortex. This is what we want in schools for children to have access to, right? So that they can think through things, they can have abstract reasoning, they can problem solve, they can have sustained focal attention, they can think about empathy, imagine the impact of their behavior on others. All of these things are part of the cortex. Now, there's 4 things we want to think about that are known through research are the 4 biggest predictors of sending you up that staircase. Okay, so if we know these 4, we can be aware of them, and we want to plan our environments to reduce these 4. So let's look at them. Novelty, things that are unfamiliar. The brain likes familiarity, it likes pattern, it will send you up the arousal staircase. Things that are unpredictable and uncertain. This is why for young children, for all of us, but especially young children, predictability, routine, every day, day in and day out is so important. Things that are novel and unfamiliar, well, it's going to be more stressful to a child if we don't allow them to have access to things that make sense, that are real to them, that connect to their lives, right, that they are familiar with. Lack of control and agency. When children feel that they have control over things, they have agency, and all of us, actually, we are less stressed and feeling alone and isolated. The name of the game for all of us is to create, if we want children's cortex open, we want them to be able to learn, we need to create regulated environments that reduce stress so that we can have the limbic system available and the cortex. And I'm going to say to you that play-based learning for young children, it's not only good for cognitive development, for social, emotional, for physical development, it is a stress reducer, and it will keep children regulated. Here is an example of the kind of thing that we're teaching children from the youngest ages. This is a TKH classroom. We're teaching children to understand state-dependent functioning and to feel a sense of agency and control. It's okay to have lots of big feelings. We know children are coming into our classrooms with more emotions than ever, right? A lot of stress. It's okay to have those. You can have agency and control over those feelings. We're going to direct them to help you know how to bring yourself down that arousal staircase. So here he's doing do you see the breathing with the flower, the finger breathing, and here he's hitting the chime, a child, and every time he hits the chime, they touch their heart. They're practicing breathing. They're coming down from a state of stress to a state of calm. Do you see on the far left here, this little guy, he was so sad and dysregulated when his mother dropped him off, and he was falling apart. What did his friend do? It's hard to see, but do you see the breathing ball? Ran up and got the breathing ball and said, "It's okay, I gotcha. Let's breathe together." We also are saying, it's so all of you can come into our high-quality early learning environment. All of you, all of your feelings. You belong. We see you, we hear you. It's not okay to dysregulate on all of us. We're going to teach you tools, but we have places where you can go. People are having calm spaces, safe spaces. So this is part of, again, just thinking about that stress reduction. And we are building, and you'll hear, I'm sure, a lot about this, Children's Regulation Toolkit, these social emotional capacities. But what I'm here to reinforce is not only are we doing this in ways that is beautiful through, but a lot of, and just normalizing that children are going to feel stressed and that we can help them deal with that. It's often done through play. Okay, so do you see here, we're building these toolkits. This is a poster that somebody has put up in an early learning program. Okay, this is why you're going to hear over and over and over why relationships are so central in early childhood. I mean, this is like am I right, early childhood folks? Relationships is our curriculum. Relationships, building them, sustaining them, strengthening them, repairing them. It is our curriculum. It is central to our curriculum. It's not only how children are going to learn, but it is central to how they are going to be co-regulated to reduce their stress so that they can build coping, resilience, and healing. So you'll see lots of things like this. This is from a TK classroom. A book that reinforces, we see you, we hear you. It's in children's home languages and in English. Helps children see. One of the things in early childhood is we talk about the 100 languages of children. They're just learning oral expression. They have many, many ways of showing us what they know, what they're thinking, how as scientists they're making sense of things, right? We talk about these as the 100 languages. And this is part of what we want to bring and see in early learning environments, because if we limit it just to written text or oral text, we're not able to understand children's full complement of ideas. So we talk about drawing, singing, painting, working with clay, all sorts of different languages. And you see that here. And here's Angela in this book. Every child in this book, we are reinforcing, you belong, we see you, we hear you. We recognize that you show us what's meaningful to you, your family, and your community through these many languages. But you'll see things like this that is reinforcing belonging, reinforcing relationship, reinforcing that sense of safety. Because the more you see yourself in that environment, the more what is familiar to you and your family is reflected back, the safer you feel, the more regulated you are, the more capable you are of learning. Okay, so we're just about ready. I'm going to start opening up the classroom doors that we're going to look in very soon. But here are a few things I want you to think about as we look in these classrooms. And this is for you today. This is for you as you are wandering and or walking through and doing your walkthroughs in your sites. Literally, and I think in my introduction they shared I led the Center for Play Research for many years. I have every research article you could ever want on play. And I always offer that. Sometimes people, especially if it's a learning edge for you, find it helpful to see the research, the empirical studies, and I'm happy to share those with you. So please know that. I used to do this with families when they weren't so sure about my play-based kindergarten. I didn't have as many questions in preschool. I was a preschool and a kindergarten teacher. But in kindergarten I did. And they wanted to see the research. They always, even if they didn't understand it, they just wanted to see that when I said it's research-based, that it was. So here are the things that we want to be looking for. This is what research decades in anthropology, sociology, psychology, education, and so on says. These are themes. Children cannot learn unless they are active. Remember I said the image of the child as a scientist? If you walk into a room and children are sitting, they're listening, and the teacher's doing the talking, they can't move, they can't touch, that's not what research is saying that how they learn. They're best when their social emotional needs are met. We spend so much time on building social emotional capacities. And we could think about that. Of course, that makes sense. Children need to get along. They need those skills to interact. However, do you see with the state-dependent functioning, we also need children to have social emotional safety in order to learn to have the cortex open, the limbic system open. They learn best when new information is presented in a meaningful context. Of course, right? But remember I said that novelty is one of those things that sends you up the continuum of stress. It activates your stress response system. This is going to become really essential in my breakout when we talk about language and literacy, because we've introduced a lot of things, especially for literacy, that are very abstract for children. We want to have literacy embedded into their play. language embedded into their play. This is why, I mean, for cultural reasons, for identity reasons, we want their first language and their home language. We also want it because it's familiar to children. It will allow their cortex to be open for them to do their best work. The process of learning is as important as the outcome in play-based learning. You're going to see that. And because the brain, remember I said it's literally an explosion of dendrites in those first 5 years, it is so variable. And this is just a truth of child development. It changes a little bit as children get older. There's a little bit more homogeneity in development. In those first 5 years, you can see children all over the map in terms of their developmental outcomes or milestones, and it's not of concern. A pediatrician will say that is normal. Children just develop at different rates for different skills and different abilities, different physical attributes, and that is just what it is. It's just varied. So we have to think about diversification, that sort of changing things up to think about who is this child, what is their interest, where are they, what are their strengths. We do that for all children, but it's like superpowered in early childhood, right? Because we can't think about this is a class of 4-year-olds. How do 4-year-olds think? Because they're so diverse. I think we have somebody here in the audience who's doing a whole session on this. So I will just tee that up and you'll learn more and more about this. When we think about, for those of you who are, you might think about traditionally thinking about lesson planning by like an area, a discipline. So we might have, social studies lesson plan or reading, mathematics. You might think about teaching things in reading or math or science, right? And we think about those things in somewhat, I would say that in elementary school we often integrate things. But you think about things, whether it's the standards or lesson planning or assessment within these kinds of strands. You have to, this is a time to, remember we said we're going to reframe and in some ways reclaim. We are going to reclaim what that looks like in early childhood because that is not how children learn. That's not how we plan curriculum. That's not how we assess by domain. Children learn in a really, really integrated manner. So let me give you an example, and then again, you have a whole breakout session on this. But this was a picture that I took in Oakland in this TK there. And this little boy in the center was playing at the sand table. We'll talk about how important sand tables are in a minute. And he's pouring the sand back and forth, and there's funnels. And as he's pouring, he's telling a little story about a soup that he's making for the baby, and he's narrating this story. But he's also saying like, oh, that's too much. Oh, that's too little. He's stacking the cups by size as he's telling the story. His teacher doesn't interrupt the play, but she's observing him from the side. And she says, tell me what you're doing. Tell me what you're playing. And he starts to tell her, we're making a soup. The baby's sick. And she says, making a soup? What's in the soup? He says, there's carrots, there's celery. And he starts going on. And so, as a smart TK teacher will do, she takes her hand and she starts to, well, let me write down that recipe. What are those things that are in your soup? And she says, thank you, let me read this back to you. And she reads back the recipe. Did I get it just right? He takes her hand and he says, he looks at it. Yeah, you got it just right, okay? Now, here's the thing. We're not, in this context, we're not saying, oh, he's learning his fine motor skills. That's what he's doing. Or, oh, he's learning about mathematical thinking and the language of too little, too much, volume sequencing. We're not saying he's only learning story, narrative. We're saying he's learning all of these things, and we can observe all of them within even a minute or two context of observing that child. He's learning that the speech that can be written down, that's the beginning of his symbolic abstract awareness, right, for literacy. And he's highly engaged. So what you're going to see is that children learn in this integrated manner, and we're going to observe them in that integrated manner to both know how to plan for them, to extend their learning, and to assess them. So you can see here another, in this area, they're learning about snails. He's feeling what the snails are like going on his arm. He's interacting with kids. You can see them as scientists really engaged. They're talking, they're moving, they're exploring, they're asking questions. And all of these, you can't see all that print, but you can see all the different foundations there, all the different types of learning that are going on in an integrated manner from the preschool foundations. And this is what we mean when we say that children learn in an integrated manner. We don't want to just take apart. Do you see how he's learning through engaged play? And if we were to take him aside and just give him and sort of focus on one aspect, let's say the vocabulary around snails, or some kind of math lesson that was separate from everything else on counting the snails, it wouldn't be as engaging. It wouldn't be as interesting. Here you've got the child learning math. There's lots of cognitive development in there, lots of language, lots of social emotional at the table. And the teacher learns about the foundations and learns to observe and identify those in the context. So I'm going to say this in many different ways throughout the next 2 days, but as principals, as leaders, when you are walking through a TK classroom, these are some key things you want to see. Are children talking? If it's quiet, that's a problem. Children need to talk. They need to talk in their home language. They need to talk in English. Are teachers talking not at children, but in response to what children are saying? Are the teachers listening to children and their questions and extending those, right? Are they taking them as strong and capable and interested in what they're sharing? Are the teachers reading to and with children? Lots of reading to, engaged reading. We'll talk about that in my breakout. There should be movement all around the classroom. Children absorbed in play. We'll talk about all the different kinds of play. And hands-on materials. I can't tell you how many classrooms I've been in where the materials, beautiful materials, but they're in bins when the teachers take them down. That's not what we want to see. And again, we'll go into that in my breakout, what you want to see in an environment. Materials that are hands-on that children can access. We're going to start looking at play-based learning. I'm going to give you some opportunities to, after I share some examples, to talk at your tables. But as I go through here, I want you to be thinking about what you see, where your learning edge is, where your strength is in your program, in your school, in your district, and what you might have as a action step for yourself. So why is play important for young children? I always start play-based learning with this image because a lot of us, if you're not in early childhood, you know about play is fun, right? All kids do it. But what you don't know, and what the early childhood professionals in the building here know, is all the stuff that's below the surface. So here are just some of those things. And again, I have lots and lots of studies that talk about each one of these things. Play is important for healthy and brain and body development, for relationships, for imagination, for perspective taking, self-regulation, mathematical and scientific thinking, equity and fairness, identity development, stress reduction, and so on and so on and so on. Okay? There is so much that children are learning through play that when we think about as play is just fun, that's just the top of the iceberg. That's above what we can see. You're going to learn to see all of this, though, and this is what I want us to think about. These kinds of skills is just a subset. I want you to think about in the examples I'm going to go over next. Where do you see this? And as we talk about play and play-based learning, we want to think about it as a continuum. I think play got a bit of a bad rap because we only thought about it as fun and we only thought about it as one end of the continuum. Probably what most of you are most familiar with, if you're not in early childhood, is what we call free play, or this left end of the continuum, the child's self-determined play. There's a whole bunch of other kinds of play, and what research shows us for young children, for TK, pre-K, TK, K-age children, child self-determined play and adult-child collaborative play, sometimes that's called adult-guided play. It's the mixture of those two things that support children's learning at an optimal level. So those of us who are in early childhood might find that the adult-child collaborative play is the learning edge because we're really good in our field at the self-determined play. And those of you who are new to TK and early childhood might find the other side. You're really comfortable and familiar with the adult planned and adult guided play or activities, adult directed. And you're going to have your learning edge learning about this end of the continuum. All of us are somewhere on this continuum. The research shows that children of the age we're talking about need the first two. There's a role for adult planned. It should be limited. Okay, so let's look at some examples. So adult, remember, far end of the continuum here. And a strong early childhood teacher, TKK, pre-K teacher, they know all of these kinds of play, and they're going to plan thoughtfully to include them throughout the day. You want to see child self-determined play every single day in your classrooms, and not 15 minutes. We'll talk about that. It's really important that they have extended time for this. So what does it mean? Let's just all be on the same page. Child self-determined play. Play is voluntary, and it's motivated by the child as scientists. It comes from the child's interests, the child's learning goals, right? They're in charge of the direction, the meaning, the flow, the learning goals. That doesn't mean that teachers are sitting back and, teachers have a very strong role in this. They're observing with respect. They're listening. What language are they using? What ideas are they bringing into their play? How can I extend that, right? How can I set up the environment to continue that child on their learning journey? They're also doing a lot of work around observation and assessment of children as children are engaged in this kind of learning. And they're going to extend self-determined play in the guided play, in the adult-child collaborative play. But for now, we're going to take several minutes now just to look at this. Okay, here's a typical scene that you might see in any early childhood classroom. I want you to think about, I'm going to give you a few minutes in a second at your tables to talk about this, but I want you to think about what is the image of the child in this classroom, and I want you to think about what skills in this micro moment in this early learning classroom, what skills are these children learning? Okay, we're going to think about the integrated nature of learning. So here they are. There's 3 boys. You can see 2 of them here. They love to set up the blocks, and blocks are a fabulous, fabulous material to include in your classroom. But they love to set up the blocks and set up different games. So on this day, they're setting up, I don't know if you can tell, there's a ramp, and they have a ball with another little block, and they're using the one block to hit the ball. The ball is meant to go down the ramp and through the hollow block. Okay, so they came up with this. This was their game. And they explained to their teacher, this is Pablo, he's telling his teacher, we're winners when we can hit the ball and it goes through here. And he says, I've tried it twice. And she says, well, tell me what's happening. What are you learning? He says, well, when I'm learning, let me see if I included this picture. Yeah. Do you see here? He says, I'm learning that the ball always ricochets off. Of course, he doesn't use the word ricochet, but the ball is always going off. So the boys get together, they kind of huddle, and they think, well, maybe the blocks aren't aligned just right. So do you see them there? They're kind of working to say, are they aligned? Are the blocks just right? And they try over and over, and they gosh, boy, we're losers. We're not winning. We're not winning the game. And she's observing. And then Pablo says, you know what? Maybe if I get closer, maybe that's what it is. So do you see how he comes in closer and he hits the ball? It still ricochets off. So they have one more huddle. The boys come together, and then they said, Teacher Maria, guess what? Now we're winners. And she said, tell me about that. And they said, we decided when you hit the ball and it ricochets off, that's how you win the game. Okay? Now, early childhood folks in the room, is this a typical scene in early childhood? Very typical, could happen any day? Okay. Take 1 minute, 1.5 minutes. What did you see in this class? What is the integrated nature of learning? What are these boys learning? What skills, knowledge, dispositions? Collaboration. Okay, did you want to add something? Okay, to be innovative thinkers. Problem solving. Very good. Engagement and persistence. Absolutely. Yeah, they're learning a lot about physics, right? Okay, good. And they're learning, did you love how it was okay to be they were just sort of saying, you know what, failure is part of learning. Like it wasn't shameful, right? It was just we're problem solving and we can turn this around. We can learn from these mistakes. Okay. When you think about what children are learning when they play with wooden blocks, I only put a little bit here, just in one domain, the mathematical thinking. But I could have done the same for language and literacy. I could do the same for scientific thinking. I could do the same for, language and so on. They're learning so much. And the teacher, Maria, who is sitting on the outside observing this, she can gather all this information about the individual children for assessments. So integrated learning, but you see a lot of engagement, a lot of problem solving. They're motivated internally. The learning goal comes from them. Here's another example. In the dramatic play area, these children are setting up a restaurant. The teachers noticed their interest in the restaurant and put out this book of simple recipes. You can see it just has like pictures and simple words underneath each picture. The children were using that, and within a month or even a few weeks, they had some sight words. It was meaningful to them. It had to do with their play. It wasn't abstract. But you see, not very many people were coming to the restaurant. So they have a sign here, open abierto. Now, the children, it came from them. They're motivated. They put up the sign, and all of a sudden they're talking about, come, come, come. We're open. Abierto, come, right? Do you see they're learning? It's functional. It's meaningful. It matters. It's engaging. It's in their play. Elena has an orthopedic impairment. She can't use her hands. And in her classroom, in the free play and the child self-determined play, the children, her peers, were making a necklace, and they were stringing beads together for a necklace. And Elena could show, she could communicate in many ways through her eyes. She could raise her eyebrows for yes, and she could turn her head for no. Her peers, because of the open-endedness of play and the context of this inclusive classroom, her peers could show her several beads at once, and she could communicate. Did she want something? Or no, she did not want something. She would turn away. She was able to be included and play along with them in her own way. And one of the things about a play-based classroom that it has all those different kinds of play, it can be beautifully supportive of children with all sorts of special needs and disabilities and inclusive environment. Okay, when you are looking for, so here's I want to go through several kinds of play and materials that you want to see in your building, you want to see in your classroom. Remember, you are the ally, you are the steward saying, we're going to have developmentally informed TK and pre-K. These are things for child self-determined play that should be in every high-quality environment. Sensory play, Play-Doh, you saw the sand table, water, playing with water and water tables. Not only is it helpful because children chat and they talk, they engage, and it's fun for them, but I'm going to tell you from an equity standpoint, oftentimes our children who are activated with stress response, maybe they live with chronic stress, they have trauma, they can't afford, their brain is telling them they can't afford to engage in, let's say, imaginary play. To take their attention off of tracking the building, the here and now, doesn't feel safe. This is a way for them to just sit and play at the at the water table. It's a way for them to be included and to be engaged. It also, sensory play, how many of you, I don't know if we have Play-Doh here, but how many of you, if we did, would be squishing it, right? It's regulating, it's calming. How many of you at the end of a long day want to go in the shower or want to sit in a hot tub when you are on vacation or something? It's soothing. How many of you like to go to the beach and put your feet in the sand? It's regulating. It takes you from that, remember the arousal continuum, and it brings children down. So it not only includes children, gives them a place to play, but it also is a stress reducer. This is Carlene Spears, who's a TK teacher up in Shasta County. Here you can say she's put this provocation out on the tables of the shaving cream, and the children are exploring in different ways. Some of them started to do silly faces, and then she used this to shift into adult guided play. She said, I wonder if we could all write the first letter of our names. And so you can see how they're doing that. We want to see lots of different manipulatives where children, again, have shelves and you can see they can touch and take things off the shelves. You want to see them working by themselves in small groups um, with their teacher, but lots of different manipulatives. This kind of, I think children are learning, who am I? Am I somebody, am I a learner who can be capable of things? Like this kind of a pegboard, every time the child puts the peg in the pegboard, they're developing that sense of mastery. Look at me, look what I can do, right? They're developing that sense of self-esteem. You want to see things that are helping children to develop fine motor control and muscular control. Oftentimes, when we take play away from children and then we give them pencils and we're wondering why they're struggling in first, second, and third grade, they haven't literally developed the muscle control to hold the pencil. But this is a fun way to do this, right? Through play. So do you see how they're using the frogs to pick up the little pieces? This was in Fremont. You can see here they're using, again, the Play-Doh is helping, all of the kind of sensory-based play can help. And then here, I don't know if you can see in the bottom right, he's got the tweezers. Tweezers are helping him to develop those hand muscles that he's going to need not only to hold a pencil, but also to cut with scissors and so on and so on. Loose parts, you want to see lots of loose parts. Loose parts that can be moved, used, combined, changed. We can use them in lots of different ways. They don't have directions. There's not a right way to use them. They not only will support all sorts of domains of children's development, their creativity, their innovation, but here's the thing. How many of you, and I can only imagine every one of us to some degree, right? You come home from, you've had a day. You've had a day. And you're sitting there thinking, I don't know, I just need to get this off my chest. You have a partner, you have a friend, you have a child, a daughter, or maybe you don't want to talk out a story, you want to write it out in your journal, but you just need to share what's going on. And by sharing the story of what's happening for you, does it feel less stressful? How many times have you talked to a partner? You're like, oh, honey, and you go through the day and you're like, thank you so much. And all they've been doing is just listening. They haven't said a word. They're like, what did I do? I didn't even say anything. Just thank you for being there. Thank you for listening. Just getting it off your chest makes you feel less isolated. This is what children do with loose parts. They bring their stories, things that feel overwhelming, things that they don't understand in the world. And they use the loose parts to tell stories. It helps them feel like they are not as isolated. Sometimes children, especially with scary things, they don't have the words to talk about it, or they don't feel safe talking about it even if they have the words. But they can tell lots of stories through loose parts. So for lots and lots of different reasons, you want to see these. Large body play. Children should have access to large body play inside and outside throughout the day. We definitely do not want to take it away from them. It's regulating and it supports of course, their physical development, their social emotional development, all sorts of development, but really, really, really important for them to have. I put this up here because too often when we don't understand child development and we don't realize how important that is, it's one of the first things that goes. If we're worried about, children meeting milestones, especially with learning loss, we take this away. But here's from The Body Keeps a Score, Bessel van der Kolk, world-famous trauma researcher and clinician. And what does he tell us? We're traumatized children, and it doesn't have to be a child who has literally experienced trauma. It can be a child who lives with high stress. Where they are concerned, the very, very, very last things we should be cutting from education is recess and anything else that involves movement, play, and other forms of joyful engagement. Why? Because that's regulating, it's stress reducing, and it's their pathway to coping, building resilience, and healing. Do you see why this is why it's so central, play-based learning to equity? If we can't give children the tools to tell us what they're thinking, how they're feeling, and how to reduce their stress, we're not being fair to them. The outdoor classroom, I won't say too much about it now, but just to say in early childhood, self-determined play, we are as intentional about using outdoor time as we are indoors. We plan it as much as indoors, and you'll see a lot of the things that we do indoors, we bring outdoors for children. It's the loosest source of, the richest source of loose parts that children have access to is learning outside. And look at this self-determined play. You can see they're busy. You can see they're engaged. They're motivated. They're exploring. Artistic expression often has to do with child self-determined play. So you can see here the easel. This is very common and popular for a child to be able to paint on an easel. But on the right-hand side, this is outdoors where they've put this weaving with the group. And children throughout the class and throughout their outdoor time can come up and add to the weaving. Imaginary, not only is, we've seen in early childhood classrooms, a disappearance of blocks. We want to bring them back in. We've seen a disappearance of sensory play, our water tables, our sand tables. We need to bring those back in. We've also seen a disappearance of our dramatic play areas and imaginary play. So in this context of child self-determined play, I wanted to spend 1 minute talking about this. Imaginary play has been described as the most important activity for children's cognitive development. Why is that? When you think about a child engaged in imaginary play, so these two children here, do you see the little boy who's sitting there so quietly? They've come up with a game here. There is a lake with poisonous alligators all around. And that is why he's sitting there so quietly, okay? In the context of play, in the play frame, children come up with rules and they abide by those rules. They regulate each other. They monitor each other to make sure that they are abiding by those rules. The rules of this play here is you have to stay still or those alligators will eat you up. When the children they have to regulate to those rules. They are capable of doing more in that play context in terms of self-regulating their bodies, in terms of showing their capabilities than they are outside of the play context. So the minute that this little guy, it's time to go and he has to walk to the library and he has to stand behind his friend, he's probably, for many children, not going to have as much capability of self-regulating his behavior. And this is why you see a lot of early childhood teachers who know this, the power of children acting a head taller than themselves, being able to extend their skills to a much higher level when they're in the context of play. This is why you see teachers saying, we're walking to the library and we're pretending it's hot lava. Okay? Children can walk carefully. They can, instead of saying it's cleanup time, saying today we're going to be vacuum cleaners. We're going to clean together really quickly, okay? You put children in the context of play and they can be a head taller than themselves. This is why it is so important for self-regulation and for cognitive development. The same here on the side, you see the little girl with the vet. If she starts acting in a way the veterinarians don't act, who's going to be the first to tell her? Her playmate, right? They regulate each other. So we don't often think about how important it is that children are learning to follow rules, but they are. The other thing about imaginary play and why you want to see this in your classrooms and give time for it is that it supports the development of symbolic thinking. So you've got here a child who one day is using this Crayola marker as a marker, the next day pretending that it's an ice cream cone, and the next day they're on America's Got Talent, okay? They're learning to separate what they see perceptually in front of them from the meaning of that object in their mind. And the more they have practice with this, the more they're going to understand when all of a sudden they have to see squiggles that we put into different shapes and say, this is an A, this is a B, this is, do you see what happens here? Because they no longer have to just be entirely dependent upon what something looks like. They can have the meaning, the symbolic meaning, the abstract meaning of something. So you'll see a 2-year-old holding a plastic phone up to their ear. By the time they're 3, they might put a banana up to their ear. And then it goes to, I'm just going to call home. They can hold the meaning in their mind of the word, okay? And this develops symbolic thinking for all sorts of things. I put up my homework here I'm finishing up my MBA in finance and data science, and I was learning Python for coding, and I was thinking about how many children are going to be our coders of tomorrow, right, and our data scientists. It's going to start with imaginary play. Okay, so I want you to just take a minute to look at this list and think about How many elements of this self-determined play do you see in your TK classroom? What are your strengths? Where are your learning edges? Do you have sensory play, manipulative play, artistic expression, somatosensory outdoor play, imaginative play, and so on? But let's move now. So remember, that's the far end of the continuum, adult-child self-determined play. We're going to look now at adult-child collaborative play. For pretty much all of us, this is going to be the biggest learning edge. The child is still in charge of the learning goal in this, well, no, not the learning goal. They're still in charge of like the direction and flow. We want to look to what are children's interests, but the teacher is engaged and builds from that. And the teacher might have minimal guidance, moderate guidance, or more intensive guidance. But let's look at a few examples. So here's a typical one. You know, we know that young children are developing with all of their social identities. We want them to support them to have healthy racial development, identity development as young children. So you have a teacher who's reading our skin, maybe introducing the word melanin, bringing in some different stories. And here it's a little bit dark. I guess you can see this little child. They set up all different skin color, the colored pencils and the mirrors, and the children are talking and they're reading the book and they're engaging together and they're drawing portraits. I want you to look at Jade. So Jade she spent a long time, right, finding the right color for her hair, for her skin tone. You can see she was very proud to be able to write her name down there. So there was some engagement in this from the teacher, but there was a lot of open-endedness as well. This is Ryan Kurata. He is a TK. He was a TK teacher. Now he's a TK curriculum coordinator. And I'm going to show you an example of his classroom and how he has done I would say that he was more engaged than not a minimum level, but a moderate level with the children. And I want to show you the example of how it started with the child's interests, but then there was this collaboration with the adults. So as I'm going through here, I want you to think about the image of the child in his TK classroom. I want you to think about what they're learning in terms of skills and knowledge, and look for examples of rigor and joy. Okay. So these are the children. They were eating morning snack and noticing that often right after they ate, that there were ants that would congregate. He listened to them as scientists. He took them seriously. He started noticing what questions they were asking. They wanted to know where they lived. So they started to say, well, let's explore that. He wanted to assess where they were in the beginning. The children said, well, I think they live in holes in the ground. And so they started to draw pictures and imagine themselves as ants, what they might see. So he's trying to do that, where are we starting from? That assessment of what we know when we begin. They read books. They started to learn about ant colonies. And here you can see, do you see how they're painting together? They're able to move. They're able to talk. They're able to express through the 100 languages of children different ways of showing what they know. He sets up science. And he says, here I am. They're talking. They're thinking together. They're exploring. And I'm observing, and I'm writing down and documenting for assessment. Again, learning about the naming of different ant parts and so on. Building the 3D ant models, bringing in different languages of children. They buddied with the K class, and they put together a stop motion animation short. They're learning about how do you put together a story? What are the narratives? Using some artistic expression. But all of this is coming from the children's interests. They had learned about circuits, and the children were asking, how do ants move? Oh, well, maybe we connect that with our love of circuits, and they made these ant bots. In his classroom, he says, I always start knowing, I knew that I had standards to teach, but I look and listen for where the children's interests are, and I'm constantly trying to balance the two. He said, so I knew that I was going to do this Next Generation Science Standards project. I didn't know what the topic would be, and he's listening to the children, and he goes from there. So they came up with this beautiful, balance scale of the curiosities and the foundations, the preschool foundations. He says, I'm wanting to bring children into the standards in ways that are engaging, that are joyful, and that are based on their interests. Here's one other example that I loved. I wrote here, the image of the child is strong and capable. these children were using their trikes at recess and realized that there was no painting on the ground. It was kind of chaotic and it wasn't very safe. And so they started to say, we need some changes around here. And they had a question, a driving question. How can we create a fun and safe experience while using our trikes on the blacktop? So do you see the image of the child as strong and capable, that they have this driving question? They brought the children together to talk about solutions. It's hard to see on the bottom, but you've got all of the children with a map of the playground, and they're talking about how they might make changes together. And then they're voting. They're voting on their favorite path among different options that the children have participated in. You can see the rigor here. You can see the joy. There's one other picture here, the bike maintenance. You can see they've got that. And then figuring out the right width of the road. So that it's hard to see the picture, but the children are on the trikes and they're measuring to see how wide they need to paint the path down. Do you see the integrated learning, the problem solving, the social emotional, the math, the so on? And children feel a sense of belonging, right, in this school. They take us seriously. They're listening to us. Okay, now we're on the other end of the continuum, the adult planned, adult directed play. There is a role for this. Some of you might see this in things like a freeze dance, right? Teacher puts on, you listen to the music and the children freeze. They're learning to listen, they're learning to self-regulate. You might see it in letter bingo. You might see it in lots of different kinds of things. There's a role for that. But what I'm going to tell you based on how children learn, when adults are in charge of the learning goal, the flow, the direction, the materials, this needs to have the most limited real estate in your day. So I said this before, but I'll say it again. Daily opportunities to engage in self-determined play, many opportunities daily as well to participate in the guided or adult-child collaborative play, and very limited time spent in adult planned and directed play. So this is where you want to think about where your learning edge is. And for some of you, if the bulk of your TK day is because you kind of based it on that original model of kindergarten coming down, this might be a really big shift. And that's okay. You're here, you're learning. We'll take it, in time. The last thing I want to say is this is from Diane Levin, and she talks about how, we've gotten to the point in a lot of our classrooms that children are moving from 15-minute segments, one activity to the next activity to the next activity. And she says, actually, the beauty and the power of play-based learning is when children have a problem, they bring it into their play, they interact, they engage with the materials, they come up with some ideas and solutions, they encounter a new problem, they bring that into their play. It's a spiral curriculum. We need children to have opportunities to engage with the same materials, to have lengthy periods of time where they can actually do the deep work and have this play learning process. So this is the provocation for you, is where's your strength and where's your learning edge? Do you see across that continuum, which of these kinds of play do you have in your TK? But it's not just the kinds of play. Do children have extended blocks, or is it only 15 minutes or 20 minutes? Because if that's the case, you're not going to see these outcomes from this research that I talked about. You're not going to see those same outcomes. It's like you're almost there, but you didn't get all the way there, right? There's a few things I want to talk about. One is this play as being essential for stress reduction, building resilience, improving regulation, and healing. We have so many children who are coming in our doors who have experienced from the pandemic, from all sorts of things, expansive stress. Same for our teachers, same for you as leaders. So from this perspective alone, if you didn't hear anything else today, I want you to really pay attention to this because it's so essential for children. Remember, the key is the arousal staircase. If they're coming in our doors and they're up at alarm, fear, and terror, we need to help bring them down. Not only to learn, which is what I've been talking about, but because when they're down at calm, they don't have those stress chemicals that are activating and circulating throughout their bodies, and that's what creates the harm, right? And it changes. The more they have the activation of their stress response system, those stress chemicals are released, the more it impacts the development of their brain. And if you impact the development of the lower parts of the brain and it's overactivated, you're not going to see the limbic system and the cortex developing properly. And this is why we see children who have high stress and a lot of early trauma without support having a lot of delays and a lot of impacts and disabilities as a result of this stress activation. So remember, we want to regulate, support children to do it themselves. We want to do it. We need to do it together to have their cortex open. We want them to be able to learn to their abilities. So one of the fastest things that we can do to regulate, this isn't just children, this is for you too, by the way. When you are stressed, when children are stressed, Bruce Perry talks about this, repetitive things that repeat, sensory, engage the senses, rhythmic movements. This is the fastest way, if you are up on that continuum, to bring you back to calm, to bring a child back to calm. Okay? So what are some of these things that are repetitive, sensory, somatosensory? Riding a bike, rhythmic, right? The physical and sensory based. Jumping, stretching, singing, drumming, walking, running, climbing, humming. These are things that we need to be giving children access to all throughout the day. This is why they need to move. If they have an activation of their stress system and they're asked to sit still, you can lead to so much harm because they can't release that activated energy, and when it stays in the body, this is when we have so much harm. Like I said, we need to have children, whether they're triggered when they come into the room or they have some kind of activation when they're with us, we need to give them a place to release that energy. For a child to be able to go out and run that out, to be able to jump and get some of that activated energy out, not only are we protecting them from those stress chemicals, but we're helping them get back down the continuum to calm. This is why, remember when van der Kolk was saying, this is the last thing you want to do is take away that outdoor, that big body time. So Anthony is here. He's in preschool, and I'm just going to quickly show you this example. It's one tiny example of how play can help children reduce stress and heal. So he's riding his trike in his TK when a loud airplane goes above him. He starts to cover his ears and he's screaming, no, 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 right? His teacher, Valentina, walks over to Anthony. She knew that he had been in a car and he had witnessed and heard the sound of a car crash on the freeway the week earlier. So he had that memory of that loud sound. And when the airplane came over, it triggered him. And she comes over and she bends down to his eye level and she's very calm and she reassures him and she says, Anthony, you're safe. You're safe here with me and TK. The teachers will take care of you. So she's helping to ground him so he doesn't feel like he's back in that traumatic setting. That loud sound was an airplane. She's differentiating that from where he is. Way up high in the sky, you are safe down here with me. And then she says, let's take a deep breath together. That's a somatosensory activity that is bringing him back to calm. She's regulating with him, using that relationship to regulate him. And then he can go off on his trike. What is he doing? More somatosensory, and he's releasing that energy charge of the activation. What is Anthony going to be ready for after that? He's probably going to be ready to come in and read a story or to do whatever he needs to do. But you bring in Anthony without that, what is he going to do? He's going to have a fight, flight, or freeze response in the classroom, right? So do you see how when we know state-dependent functioning, when we know the value of play, that we can help children he's learning, he's developing physically as well. But particularly this is important for stress reduction and children's coping skills. For time, I'm going to skip beyond this one, but I will just say that for children who have been through a lot of these community stressors, my latest book, we talk about all these stories and how play, you can use them in the classroom to help regulate and have children come into the classroom their whole selves. Remember, I see you, I hear you, I validate you, without remaining in that triggered state. We can use play to help regulate them and help them feel safe. So this is the last thing I want to say before I close, which is about these myths. We have a lot of them out there. And as I pull them up, I want you to say, am I thinking any of these? Are there people in my school who are thinking any of these? Because again, you have so much power to change the narrative, to help set the tone, and to disrupt these myths. So when children are playing, they're not learning. I hope you're seeing that there could be nothing farther from the truth than that one. If I don't teach them, and I think that means through adult direction, they won't learn. I think nobody could argue that Ryan Kurata in his classroom, when it was adult-child collaborative play, that those children aren't learning. They're learning. And the Maria with the blocks, with the boys, those children are learning because she's so intentional about setting up that environment and supporting them. Play is only for very young children. Elementary age children no longer need to play. So I agree with the superintendent. We all need to play, actually. And I'll come back to that last one. This is my research class. I teach the most complex research class for the thesis and dissertation for our students. And we often would have them play because they were so stressed out, working full-time, coming to school full-time, and having to write a thesis. And we would say at the end of the day, let's just play and relax and connect and regulate. So it is for everybody. But this last one that is really important and provocative for me to leave you on is some children who are behind their peers academically don't have time to play. And I want to go to this book. This was a book from a colleague of mine at University of Austin, Jennifer Keyes Adair, and she did a study looking at K and first grades around the country in different places. And what she found was that there were often two groupings of classrooms. And one was based on high quality experience and the research and what we know how children learn, and that is on the left. She saw children were having opportunities to influence and make decisions about their learning. They were moving around. They were observing their peers play and joining in. There was a lot of talk, a lot of questions, a lot of teachers and adults responding to children's questions. There were active in many different ways to engage, and really importantly, children were allowed to express the full range of emotions, but they were teaching them, remember the breathing ball, the calm area, they were teaching them how to regulate, how to support the expression of those emotions. That was one side. And then she saw this other theme. A lot of classrooms where there were short transitions every 15 minutes, kids were moving from one activity to the next. They were quiet. Children were sitting and asked to be compliant. Very narrow and scripted curricula that was all adult-directed and adult-driven. The problem is, from everything we've been saying, right? Research supports the side on the left. Children thrive with the side on the left. There were more behavior problems with the classrooms that looked like the characteristics on the right, more suspension, more expulsion, more push-outs. You didn't see the joy, the rigor, the engagement. And here's where the problem is. The children on the right, and this won't be a surprise to you, were more often our children of color and more often our children who lived in conditions of poverty. And what she talks about and what I want to leave you with is that when we do that, we make play a privilege and not a right. And this is why I started by saying play is the right of every child. And it's not just me saying that. It is in the United Nations on the Convention of the Rights of the Child. It is how they can tell us how they feel, what they need, who they are. And they're counting on us. They're counting on us to know what they need. They're counting on you. You're in this amazing position. We know this, that principals and school leaders, you set the tone for your buildings. And you can make the difference to say, there might be a lot of learning edges here, but you can make the difference to say, I'm on a learning journey. I'm going to listen from my early childhood colleagues. I'm going to dive in, even if this is a little uncomfortable, I'm going to go there because the children are counting on you. They're counting on you to be in an environment where they feel safe, where they can be their best self, where they can be seen and heard and validated, and in some cases, where they can heal. And so I know that that's kind of a provocative place to end, but I want to share just really quickly why I got into this work and why I wrote this book. It was about maybe 6 years ago, 7 years ago. I was teaching that research class that I showed you the picture of. And I had a student in that class. She was getting her multiple subject credential. She was working in Oakland Unified School District. She had an undergrad in child development. She had a master's degree. She was getting a master's degree in early childhood. She was committed to working in Oakland. She loved it. And one day, her principal walked in on instructional rounds with all the district leaders and looked at her classroom. And this is what happened. She was so proud when they walked in. The children were engaged in blocks. They were talking, they were moving, they were singing, they were experimenting and exploring. Her principal, and there's no blame here because the principal went through a credential program that did not talk about early childhood. Her principal said, and again, not in a it was harmful, but didn't mean to be harmful, said, we'll come back when she's teaching. We'll come back when she's teaching. And the principal left, and she came into my research class and she said, Julie, it was such a humiliating moment because I was teaching at the top of my game. And I knew the principal. I knew principals. I worked with them, and I knew that those principals would be horrified themselves if they knew that they had led to that. But she was so taken and so struck by that she left the profession. And I remember telling her, I don't know what we'll do with this, but I'm going to get involved in this because principals are amazing humans, teachers are amazing humans. We just have to bring this knowledge of early childhood together. And so I will close there by just saying, I know that you are not going to do that. And that's why you're here, and that's why it's so amazing that you're here. You're going to walk in and you're going to see that, and you're going to say, look at the blocks. Look at what they're doing, the experimenting, the curiosity. You're going to look at the water play and say, wow, that's amazing. Those children are exploring, but I noticed that little one who looked really stressed when she came in today, she's regulating over there. You're going to notice all sorts of things to validate that teacher, to support that teacher as an instructional leader, and most importantly, to make sure that those children start their brain development in the most optimal way that they can. You're going to see them and hear them and acknowledge them and validate them. So thank you for being here. Thank you for letting me come today. And good luck on this journey. We're in it together.